We have made it to the draft portion of the offseason, and today we're going to be previewing this entire draft class, going over everything we need to know for the draft episode, which will be rolling around within the next few days, and I'll have more information about when that will be at the end of today's episode. So last time around, we went through free agency, we went through the end of the playoffs with the Cowboys beating the Jaguars in the Super Bowl. We started with the re-signings phase in which Isaiah Likely and Jameson Williams both got lucrative 4-year extensions for nearly $60 million total apiece. We re-signed some other familiar faces such as Ryan Jensen, Morgan Moses, and Presley Harvin, while we lost left tackle Tyron Smith to retirement. And we lost a handful of players in free agency as well, such as Jordan Whitehead, Darnell Savage, Khalil Mack, and others. As for the guys we signed, we added some beef up front on both sides of the ball with Lane Johnson, Grady Jarrett, and Zach Tom headlining our new signings. And we brought back some guys as well. Greg Dortch was in Minnesota last year. He returns along with re-signing other players such as Ed Ingram, Javon Kinlaw, and Devontae Wyatt, who did not originally accept our extensions in the player re-signing phase, but we're able to bring them back in free agency, along with some other depth players such as Nakobe Dean and Yannick Ngakoue. Going into the draft, we have a handful of selections, including the 25th pick in the first round. We have 2 thirds, one from Washington, thanks to a trade we made last year, along with no 4th, but an additional 7th rounder. So we've got 10 picks to work with here, and we're going to be picking in the back of most rounds this year, which is obviously different than the past 2 seasons where we were one of the not-so-good teams of the league, and we're picking towards the top. So that means our strategy coming into the draft might be a little bit different, and we're going to have to be very strategic, especially early on, with what we're going to look to do. It's a really fun draft class at the top and down the board. There's a lot of depth and a lot of guys who I think that we will be able to get to contribute to our football team right away. Our roster doesn't have a ton of glaring holes. We filled out most of our weaknesses in free agency, and I think we're in a good spot going into this draft because we can really focus on drafting the best players available. In the NFL draft, I think the best way to go about it is obviously try to fill holes on your roster, but go for value. Get good players. I think the one position of real meat on this team is safety, and that's kind of on purpose because this safety class is really, really good. There's going to be great players in the first round for us to get, or if we don't pick one then, we'll be able to get someone later who should be able to contribute for us right away as a rookie. We're going to go position by position and go top to bottom, and obviously that starts at quarterback. Going into the year, we knew it was a weaker QB class, especially compared to the first 2 seasons of the series where we've had a bunch of really good quarterbacks enter the NFL. And coming into the season, there weren't many clear, surefire first-rounders. Well, that has changed as some guys have played really well. In particular, Stanley Cubbage Jr. out of Oregon. He's coming off a great season, finished 2nd in the Heisman. He had a great combine, great pro day, and most importantly, led Oregon to winning their first national championship in school history. The kid's a winner. He's a dynamic player. And yes, Oregon has a boatload of talent that you're going to see throughout today's episode. But Cubbage is a dynamic QB prospect. He's got a pretty good arm overall. His accuracy can be a little bit spotty. I think that's the one issue with him. But the reason why teams are going to like him, as a passer at least, is because of his ability to improvise and run and turn those runs into big plays. He is dynamic with his legs, very similar to like a Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields-esque quarterback. And the hope is that he'll be able to develop as a passer like Lamar Jackson has throughout his career. Johnny Gordon out of LSU, I do think ends up in the first round. He had a great season for the Tigers, helping lead them to a college football playoff appearance. And Gordon is a very different prospect to Stanley Cubbage Jr. Gordon is more of your traditional stand in the pocket and make throws in structure type of player, and certain teams are going to prefer that. If the situation's good in the sense that the offensive line is holding up and guys are getting open, Gordon might be your preferred quarterback over Cubbage because he's more accurate, he's got a stronger arm, but he's not quite the improviser, not quite the athlete, and not quite the big play threat that Stanley Cubbage is. I think when it's all said and done, those two guys end up in the first round, and I think there is a case for Connor Canyon as well out of South Carolina. At only 21 years old, Kenyon is one of the youngest players in the entire draft, and I think he's got overall a pretty well-rounded skill set. Solid enough arm, decent enough accuracy, and he's pretty mobile. This is another guy who wins out of structure, under pressure, escaping the pocket, and I think that's what teams are going to be looking for here in the modern NFL. Let's take a look at some guys who could be diamonds in the rough in day 2. We'll start with Royce Ramsey out of Middle Tennessee State, who was a massive draft riser throughout the season. Coming into the year, he was looked at as a 6th or 7th round pick, a guy who really is just intriguing because of his physical traits and hasn't really played a meaningful down of football before, but he had a great season for the Blue Raiders, leading them to the college football playoff. He's got a good arm, he can make plays under pressure, and he's got a beautiful deep ball. Cameron Fisk out of Ole Miss is pretty interesting. Coming into the season, I thought he could be a first rounder. It doesn't look like that'll end up being the case, as he was disappointing this year as a senior, seeing his stock slip. Despite that, I think he's got the physical traits to be really good. Some of the best arm strength in this entire class, and he's a big, bulky guy. 6'4", 244 pounds. He is made of stone. His accuracy can be a little bit inconsistent, though, and I wanted to see that area of his game improve more than it did. There are some interesting guys here on day 3 to watch out for. Guys like Valentino Maldonado and Isaac Bauer have big arms. Marvin Dealian led Minnesota to the college football playoff. And then Jasper St. James and Armani Forrest, both I think could be gems because of their ability out of structure, out of the pocket. Even some of these undrafted players I think could be pretty fun too. Let's move over to running back. It's a very strong class at this position, and this is a place that the Dragons very well could look to add. I like the duo of DeAndre Swift and Darwin Juskins, but I think the Dragons may look to add another tough physical runner to the picture. Khaled Garrison for sure is going to be a first-round pick, and that's because he checks off all the boxes you look for at running back. 6'3", 230 pounds. He's dynamic. He's athletic. He's quick. He can make plays on third down as a receiver. He checks off everything that NFL scouts look for, and he's got the college production as well. He won the Heisman Trophy this year at Texas, carried them to the college football playoff. He gives you everything you look for in an NFL prospect, and I think he's got a shot to go in the top 10, which is very rare for running backs. After Garrison, it's a little bit more of a crapshoot of who comes off the board next. I think Nigel Palarco has the best chance to be the second running back taken. He's another big physical runner at 6'3", 230 pounds. Pretty much identical size to that of Khaled Garrison. I don't think he's quite as quick or explosive, and he certainly isn't as good in the receiving game. But other than that, he's going to be the early down runner that I think a lot of teams look for, and I think his tough, bruising style of play could lead to him possibly sneaking into the back end of the first round. DeClain Williamson out of Oregon, I think, is a really fun prospect. He is dynamic with the football in his hands. Big-time player for Oregon who is a true three-down running back. You trust him in the receiving game, but he's also somebody who can make plays on early downs, whether it's inside the tackles or in between them. Some other intriguing Day 2 players include Styler Standards out of Mississippi State. Rasir McClendon out of California is a late addition to the draft class. Cal has a really good system for these running backs, and McClendon has developed very well with the Golden Bears. He is quick, he's agile, and I think with him being one of the youngest players in the draft, I think teams are going to like him a lot. Jace Fears out of Clemson's a pretty interesting player, 6'1", 250 pounds, big power back. Chase Gentry out of UConn is a guy whose stock has really gone up this season. Gentry has helped lead one of the best offenses in college football over the last couple of seasons down in the University of Connecticut. 6'1", 235 pounds, another big physical runner, but he's also one of the fastest running backs in his class, and his blend of size and speed makes him really intriguing. There are some other guys I like here a lot. Cason Thomas out of LSU is quite talented. J.J. Booker out of UCF I think is pretty good. Elias Wilson from Syracuse. Franklin Headliner from North Texas. All very fun players who I think are going to be very good pros at the next level. Let's move over to the wide receiver position, another area that we could look to address. And if we look at wide receiver and tight end as a whole, there's a lot of good pass catchers in this draft class. I think there's 3 surefire first-round receivers here, and I think these 3 guys could go in any order because they're 3 very different players, and it's sort of pick your poison. What type of player do you prefer the most? We'll start with Dejuan Carroll out of LSU, 6'2", 220 pounds. He's more of your refined route runner of these top 3. He's the best separator of the group as well, and I think he's the most pure, refined receiver. I think he's got the highest floor, and I think that's what teams are going to like. With Jordan Acuff II out of Florida State, you're getting somebody who can really provide a vertical presence to your offense. He's the fastest of the group, ran a 4.41 40 time, the fourth fastest among receivers at the Combine, and then ran a 4.35 at the Florida State Pro Day. This is somebody who can stretch the field and give your offense a deep passing element, but he's not overly consistent in the short game, and that's where he could look to improve. And then we've got Hakeem Clark out of Texas A&M, who is more of your just get the ball in this guy's hands and let him make plays after the catch. He is the most dynamic with the football of these top three receivers, and I think if you use him in sort of like a Deebo Samuel role in the sense of you find creative ways to craft opportunities for him to get the ball, he's going to make plays. There are a few other guys who I think could sneak into the first round, and that starts with Sebastian Pozzuelo out of Oregon State. This kid's big, 6'5", 242 pounds. He is legitimately a beast when it comes to jump ball, contested catches. He knows how to use his size and physicality to his advantage, but the thing that makes him interesting is that he's a great separator. He has great body control at his size, and I think that's going to really intrigue teams. Braxton Merkin-Burke out of Washington is built pretty similarly. He's 6'6". He's a little bit lighter at 215 pounds, and it's a little bit surprising that he's a worse separator than Pozzuelo because he's smaller. He's also not overly fast, 4.7, 4.40. He does not win with his speed. He wins with his physicality on the outside, but he's versatile. He can also play in the slot. He's good in the short game, and I think that's why teams are going to be intrigued by him. Jacob Harrison Jr. out of Central Michigan is a late addition to this class. He had an unbelievable junior season, seemingly coming out of nowhere, going for 800 yards, winning the Fred Biletnikoff Award. He was the best receiver in college football this year, and he has continued to have a great pre-draft process, performed well at the Combine, good separator, good route runner, good hands. He hasn't played against the best of competition, but other than that, he checks off all the boxes at wide receiver. Levante Monk out of UConn, I think, is a pretty fun player. 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's somebody who can play on the outside and on the inside in the slot. I think he can stretch the field vertically, but he can also make plays in the short game as a route runner. I think Cap Crew out of LSU has kind of gotten slept on because obviously LSU is another great receiver with Dejuan Carroll, but I think Crew could be just as good. 6'4", 220 pounds. He gives good size and athleticism to the position. He's got some of the best hands in the entire draft class. Doesn't drop many balls. And he's a really good separator as well. Problem is he's not a great route runner. He can't consistently get open. If he does improve there, I think he's going to be great. Emory LaVale out of USC is your prototypical stick, pick, and forget about him. What I mean by that is whoever drafts him is going to slide him right into the slot, and they've got nothing to worry about at that area because I think LaVale has such a high floor. Good route runner, good separator. He doesn't have the most consistent hands. That's the one thing he really needs to work on, and I think once he does, he's going to be a great slot guy. Can't really win on the outside, but he's a perfect slot receiver. I think there's some intriguing depth here down the board as well. Some other possible day 2 guys like Xavier Creed Jr., Evan Walters, Carlito Loco, and Aaron Mayer. And then even outside of the first 3 rounds, there are some names to watch out for on day 3. Okobo Brown had a great season. Yusuf Dumbuya, Samuel Bible, Zaylen Battle, among some of the guys who I think could be pretty good picks on day 3. Let's move over to tight end now. This is a loaded tight end class, and it sucks for us. We probably aren't going to pick one early. But there are some good ones, including the top 2, both of whom come out of the University of Miami, and that starts with Cornelius Reese, who I think is the more well-rounded of these top 2 tight end prospects. This is somebody who's a really solid athlete, really solid receiver, but he's a better blocker than the second guy, Keanu Hokulani, who I think is more of your vertical receiver presence. With Reese, you may not get someone who's going to be a consistent 1,200-yard receiver, but you are getting someone who's going to block well, catch well, run routes well at a high level. Whereas with Hokulani, I think it's a little bit more of a question if he does everything well. But if he puts the pieces together, he's going to be one of the 3 best tight ends in the NFL. And I think teams are really going to like the upside that Keanu Hokulani brings to the table because he is really athletic at his size, 6'5", nearly 250 pounds. He ran a 4.53 at the 40. He just is not a great blocker, and he needs to improve his consistency there, and if he does, I think he'll be really good. Audley Boozer out of Ohio State is a late addition to this class, 21 years old, just recently declared. I really like his skill set. He's got good hands. He can stretch the field vertically, but also make plays in the short game, and he's a good athlete as well across the board. I think he could end up being a gem. In terms of some later guys down the board, Draymond Rock out of Iowa is going to be really good. I think he's the next great Iowa tight end to enter the fold. Good blocker, good athlete, solid enough receiver. I think Bautista Maldonado, Donovan Smart, those guys are both going to be pretty good day 2 picks as well. And then even on day 3, a lot of good players there down the board. Let's move over to the offensive line now. Obviously an area that we may need to look at here in the draft. And we'll start with Mimoni Tuliesi out of Oregon, who's currently not just projected as a top 5 pick, but he is the betting favorite to be the number 1 overall selection to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Since there's not a clear top quarterback in this draft, it doesn't look like we're going to have any go at the very top of the draft, and that means other position players like Tuliesi are going to get pushed up. I think the athletic upside that Tuliesi brings to the table is why teams are going to fall in love with him. He finished in the top 5 in every athletic drill amongst offensive tackles, and he also brings a very high level of production to the table as well. When I look at an Oregon athletic tackle, I think Penei Sewell, and I think Tuliesi could have a very similar career trajectory to Sewell in the sense that he's going to be good really soon, and he's going to be really good for a long time. Behind him, there are some other intriguing names, including Dutch Koldyke out of Wisconsin. I thought throughout most of the year that Koldyke would be a surefire first-rounder. I'm not so convinced of that. I think he's probably going to end up in the early second round, but I think teams are still going to like him. 6'3", 340 pounds. He's not a great athlete, though. That's the one issue with him, but he's a really solid and well-rounded blocker. Asher Kritz out of the University of Alabama is a guy whose stock has gone up throughout the year. 6'7", 317. He's a mauler in the run game. Really solid as a pass protector, too. I think he really improved in that area throughout this season, and he could sneak into the first round. Prince Johnson out of Penn State's a pretty talented player. I think he's got an outside shot to go in the top 10. I think his stock went down a little bit throughout the year, but I still think he'll be a first rounder, just more likely in the back end of the first round. I will say his combine certainly helped him. He didn't perform well in the bench press, but in terms of the agility drills, he was dominant. He's going to be really good against quicker, athletic edge rushers, but he's also shown he can be good against power rushers as well. Seth Smith out of Boise State, I think, also has a shot to go in the first round. In terms of overall production in the pass game, there aren't many tackles in this class who have him beat. Smith is not a very good run blocker, though. That's the real issue with him. If he can improve there, I think he could be really good. Some tackles down the board to look at include Curtis Troy out of Texas, recently declared for the draft as a 22-year-old junior. 6'5", 280 pounds. He's a little bit on the skinny side, but he's really athletic. He moves very well for a tackle. And there are some intriguing day 3 guys who I think could be pretty good as well. The Dragons certainly looking for more depth at both tackle spots. Ryan Walling out of Florida State's a guy who I think could be a gem in the second or third round. 6'6", nearly 350 pounds. He moves really well for his size. He's not overly consistent, that's the one issue, but if he hits his ceiling, look out. I think he could be really good. Let's move inside to guard. The Dragons very well may look at guard early in this draft as well. And lucky for us, there's a few guys who I think could go in the first round. We'll start with Creighton Kane out of Colorado, who's had a really solid season for the Buffaloes. 6'6", 340 pounds. Another guy who I think you're kind of drafting for upside rather than what he's going to give you right now. He's not as consistent as some of these other first-round linemen, but he's really athletic at his size, and he's a big dude, nearly 340 pounds, but he moves like he's 50 pounds lighter. Let's move over to the possible first-round right guards, and there are a couple of guys here. We will start with Somandre Mack out of the University of Alabama, who's a little bit undersized at 6 foot 307 pounds, but I think he makes up for that with his production in the run game. He is an absolute mauler. He led all offensive linemen with 41 reps in the bench press at the combine. He is built like an ox, despite the fact that he's a little bit smaller than some of these other top offensive line prospects. Rudig Salamone out of Oklahoma is your more traditionally built offensive lineman. 6'5", 350. He's also a mauler in the run game. Problem is he's not a good pass blocker at all. But I think he's a little bit safer than Somandre Mack because he's a lot bigger. Gregor Clegane out of Ohio State I think could be a solid day 2 pick. He's somebody who is also built like an ox. He had 40 reps on the bench, second in the entire combine, only behind Mack out of Alabama. And then some day 3 guys to watch out for include Lance Donardo out of Kentucky and Foye Bondara out of Virginia Tech. At right guard, there's a lot of depth here. Kerry Vialia out of Tennessee is probably going to go in the early second round. I think if the team really likes him, though, he could sneak into the back end of the first round. 6'6", 327 pounds. I think he's going to be a really high floor player. There aren't many major weaknesses with his game. He's not an elite pass protector. He's not an elite run blocker, but he's pretty solid across the board with both. I think Billing Bonney out of Mississippi State could be pretty good as well. Now, he's also a little bit undersized, 6'2", 307 pounds, and he's not a great athlete despite his size, but I think he's good in the passing game. He's solid in the run game as well, and I think he could be pretty good as well. Some solid day 3 guys, too, as we move over to center. Shamar Watson Lansdale, I think, is quite good, and I think he's kind of being undervalued in this draft. He's currently projected to go late in the second round. I think he should go earlier than that. I think there's an argument for him to go in the first round. Really solid athlete at center, good in the pass game, good in the run game. I think he's going to be a starter in this league for a decade. Very, very good player. Raymond Reed out of Oklahoma could also be a day 2 pick. And F.A. Oluwakadu out of Penn State is also a very talented guy. So Oluwakadu is interesting because he had a great junior season last year with Penn State. Comes in this year and looks horrible through the first 6 games of the year. And he played really well after that, which is why he's decided to re-enter the draft. Otherwise, he would have looked to have gotten one more year of eligibility as a graduate transfer. But he is going to declare for the draft after all. Really solid pass protector, really good athlete. I think he built a lot of his stock back with a great second half of the season. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. We'll start with the defensive line, and we'll go inside out, beginning with defensive tackle. Chuba Manger out of Michigan has been one of the most disruptive players in college football this year. He hasn't put up the big numbers per se, but he is a dominant force in the run game. He's a pretty good pass rusher across the board, and he's a pretty solid athlete. I think the fact that he's well-rounded and a 3-down player is what's going to make him super disruptive at the next level, and his consistent improvement every year with the Michigan Wolverines is very telling about his progression going forward, and I think he could very well be a top 5 pick. His stock has really gone up throughout the season. Carmelo Finnegan out of Ohio State's kind of interesting because he's a little undersized, 6'4", 280 pounds. Ideally, he's more of a defensive end type of player. I don't know if he's got the quickness necessarily to be on the edge, though. I think it would best suit him to gain 20 or 30 pounds of weight, get a little stronger, bulk up. I think he's a good run stopper as is, and if he develops as a pass rusher, he could be pretty good. Quincy Carter out of Clemson's a very fascinating guy. Somebody who I think is a really high floor prospect because he's got some of the best pass rush moves of any defensive tackle in this draft class. But I think he's also super quick and agile, and that's going to make him a really intriguing player long term. I think he's got a very high ceiling. Alfie Bacon out of Minnesota is also kind of fascinating because he missed his entire senior season, but he also tested unbelievably well at the combine. For somebody who's 370 pounds, he ran less than a 5-second 40-yard dash. Very similar to a Jordan Davis type of player. He's a pure nose tackle, not necessarily a 3-down guy, especially right away, but you're plugging him in there to disrupt rushing lanes, and his athleticism gives him some real upside. Looking at some of the non-first rounders, I like Levelyn Brown Jr. out of Baylor a lot. 6'4", 280, built very similarly to Carmelo Finnegan, the Ohio State kid. But I think Brown is more of a fit to move over to the edge because he's a little bit quicker. He's a good run stopper, pretty good set of pass rush moves. I think he should be a first rounder. I'm not sure why he's projected as a day 2 guy. Badger Hawkins out of Ohio State is a late addition to this class as a declaring player. He's kind of a one-trick pony as a pass rusher, but he really knows how to use his power and his brute strength to make plays in the backfield. It's going to be harder going up against bigger, stronger NFL offensive linemen, but if he continues to succeed there, I think he could be really good. I like the depth inside here at defensive tackle as well on day 3 as we take a look at the defensive end, some of the top edge rushing prospects in this draft. A lot of these guys were projected to go earlier than they are now when we last talked about them, including Caleb Mabin out of Florida, who, when we first talked about him around halfway through the season, he was the very slight favorite to be the number 1 overall pick in the draft, and it no longer looks like that's going to be the case. Over his final 3 games with the Gators, he really didn't play all that well, and his stock really fell to a mid to late first-round guy, but he built it right back up at the combine. 4.43 40-yard dash, fastest amongst edge players. He led all edge rushers in vertical jump. He was second in 3-cone drill, 5th in 20-yard shuttle. His athleticism has brought him back up into the top 10, and while I don't think he'll go number 1 overall anymore, he'll still be one of the top defensive players off the board. His ceiling that he brings to the table with his explosiveness and dynamite off the edge is going to really excite teams. Mustafa Diaby out of Arizona has seen his stock go up throughout the year, and he looks like more of a surefire first-rounder. He wins with his quickness, bend, and get-off the edge. Another really impressive athlete, and I think he's going to be a 3-down player. He's a good run stopper, which I think is a pretty big deal. Prabhakar Claude out of Navy has seen his stock go down as the year has gone along, but I still think he's a pretty intriguing player. 6'5", nearly 300 pounds. He's one of the youngest players in the entire draft at just 20 years old, but he just hasn't really shown the consistent game-to-game talent that warrants a top 10 pick, which we thought he would be earlier in the year. Moving over to right end now, Dragan Markovic out of USC is in play to be the top player selected in the entire draft, number 1 of the Bucks, 6'7", 270. He's a really good run stopper, solid power moves. He doesn't have a ton of quickness off the edge, but other than that, I think he's going to be really good. Prince Nwoko out of South Florida is kind of an interesting player because he's on the shorter side, 6 foot. He is 317 pounds, though. Not a very good run stopper, really at all, but he does bring a lot of quickness and athleticism off the edge. Despite being undersized, I think he could be a pretty intriguing prospect, despite his rare build, if you will. Junior Miro out of Texas A&M is a pretty talented player as well, 6'2", 285 pounds. He is a very talented player. I think he's pretty well-rounded as a pass rusher. He can win with his strength. He can win with his quickness. Again, not a great run stopper, though. That's the issue with his game. But other than that, I think he could be pretty good. Eric Abodije from West Virginia is another late addition to the class, 21 years old. I think he's a really well-rounded player right away. Good run stopper, good finesse rusher, good power rusher. I hate to compare players to like all pro level pass rushers, but he reminds me a lot of Simeon Bonnet coming out of Tennessee. And I think he's going to go probably right around where Bonnet did. Both guys super polished, and they have the athleticism to suggest that they have a high ceiling as well. Williamson Wilson out of LSU headlines the day 2 edge rushing class. 6'6", 300 pounds, somebody who has the size to transition inside, but his quickness off the edge might keep him there. He's going to be able to overpower smaller tackles, and I think that makes him very intriguing down the line. At right end, a few more talented day 2 guys. A.J. Price out of Minnesota, Kyer Moss out of Fresno State. Both very, very talented, along with, obviously, these top guys. And then looking further down the board on day 3, I like Hendon Clearwater out of UCLA. Nnamdi Sanaga out of Washington is very talented as well. Let's move over to linebacker now. We'll start on the outside and go in because the outside linebackers are more edge rushers, and some of these guys are kind of similar to the defensive ends. We'll start with Roman Bishop out of Florida State. 6'5", 270 pounds. Bishop's a really fun player because he can really do just about everything. You like what he brings as a pass rusher? Put him on the edge. He's a good cover player too. Very instinctive in zone coverage, although he is a little bit slower, and I do worry that he will struggle with some of the athletic and quicker tight ends. But other than that, I think he's going to be a really well-rounded player who you can have do a variety of different things for your defense. And I think his versatility may lead to him going to the top 10 of this year's draft. Carter Davis out of Washington has had his stock go up, 6'5", 260. I really like the bend and quickness he brings off the edge. Good run stopper as well. Not really a cover guy. He's going to be an edge rusher, and I think he's going to be a very good one. Griffin Ofenlock out of Notre Dame has had his stock go down, but I do like him quite a bit. I think he has the raw pass rushing talent you look for. He just needs more consistency with his pass rushing moves, but if he gets there, I think he could be really good. Jabbar Julian out of Wisconsin was one of the best defensive players in the country this year. 11.5 sacks, winning the Dick Butkus Award as the best linebacker in the country, although I think he may play with his hand in the dirt, especially if he gets drafted to a 4-3 team. 6'6", 270, really good quickness off the edge, solid run stopper, very, very good pass rusher, though. He gets after the quarterback at a high level. Bobcat Charleston out of Georgia is a fun player, another guy who's super versatile. Probably going to be more of an off-ball linebacker because of his ability in coverage and his ability as a run defender. And I think he could really be a very scheme-dependent player who you can kind of throw in all over the defense, and he'll be successful. Some other guys to watch out for include Rudy Baskett out of Auburn, another late addition, Roosevelt Meadows for Utah, and Ty Jackson out of Bowling Green. Both look pretty talented. And then on day 3, I really like Yaya Uzoma out of UCF. I think he could be a gem. Benedict Del Fritz from Oregon. Allen Givens II from South Carolina. All talented players. And then a right outside linebacker, Jalen Butler. He is a really, really good player. He's a little bit on the older side, 24 years old, but I think he's very talented. Nicolo Mazzetti out of Ohio State. Didn't test well at the Combine. Saw his stock go down, but he has a lot of production with the Buckeyes and is very talented. Saul Pepper, Casey Marbury, Zantrez Miller, all very solid as well. And then let's look inside. Vernon Rudy Sale out of Clemson could be the highest off-ball linebacker drafted since Devin White back in 2019. Rudy Sale gives you the size, length, and athleticism you look for at off-ball linebacker. 6'2", 245 pounds. He tested very well at the Combine. The reason why I think he's going to be more successful than a lot of these recent highly drafted off-ball linebackers is because he's a really smart, instinctive player, especially in coverage. Very good cover player in zone, in man, whether it's in the slot or as a true linebacker. He does it all. And I think him being a jack of all trades in coverage is going to really intrigue teams and potentially lead to him going to the top 5. Chip Links out of Miami is kind of interesting because coming into the year, he looked like a day 2 guy. He had a really good season for the Hurricanes and potentially propelled himself into the first round, but he had a rough Combine. 4.7 40-yard dash is a lot slower than he was expecting, and he didn't necessarily do all that great in the other drills either. Not as instinctive in coverage as Rudy Sale, but I think he's a good run stopper, and if nothing else, he can be a tough, physical downhill linebacker who can give you good snaps on early downs. Finley Harrison's good, so is Kai Kamaka. I do really like Amaya Reyes out of Penn State, another late addition, somebody who just recently entered the draft class. Really, really good cover player. A little bit on the smaller side, 6'2", 200 pounds. Might be more of a safety long term because of his quickness and his cover ability, especially in zone. Lake Holloman out of UConn's a pretty talented player as well. Another very good cover linebacker, although he's 240 pounds, and he's just as athletic as Amaya Reyes is, which I think is going to be something that teams really like. Let's move over to the secondary. Very talented group of defensive backs in this year's class. Last season, we really focused on the secondary early in the draft, and I wouldn't be surprised if we do it again because there's a lot of talent, especially at safety, but we'll start with corner. Got a handful of guys who could go in the first round and a few players right behind them who I think could lead to a really good crop of day 2 players. We'll start with Isaiah Youngblood out of the University of North Carolina, who I think has got a good shot to go in the top 5. Most consistent cover corner in college football this year. He is sticky in man coverage. Not all that great in zone, but he is somebody who can really, truly lock up elite receivers, and I think he's got the size and length to continue to do it in the NFL. Ran a 4.37 40-yard dash, the fastest amongst all corners at the Combine, 4.32 at his pro day. Again, the fastest amongst all corners, and he's very dynamic as well, very quick, very agile. Behind him, I like Deshaun Faith a lot out of Colorado. Best ball skills in the draft, or at least he's right up there as some of the best pair of hands and best ball skills of any corner projected to go in the first round. He's a little bit undersized, 5'11", 196, or at least he's undersized compared to these other corners. But he also ran a 4.37, tied with Isaiah Youngblood as the fastest corner in the draft. And I don't think he's far off in coverage either. Very good in man. He's better in zone than Youngblood, and I think he's a little bit more physical as well. He's just a little bit smaller. Kamari Banks II out of Oklahoma State's a pretty intriguing player. 6'2", 210 pounds. He's a lot more raw than these top 2 guys. I was hoping he would test better than them at the Combine. He did not, which is a little bit worrying. But I think his athleticism and his flashes in man coverage and his flashes of ball skills do lead to him being a very intriguing player and somebody who could sneak into the first round. Corbin Sheffield out of Oklahoma, I think also could sneak into the first round. When's the last time we've had a white corner drafted this high? For those of you who saw the Rashard Mendenhall tweet the other day, you may know what I'm talking about with the white versus black Pro Bowl. Team White is going to get blasted on the outside at corner, and Corbin Sheffield is probably going to be the first white corner in the first round in decades, plural. He's 6 foot, 200 pounds, solid ball skills, Very solid in coverage, but I really like his physicality and the toughness he brings to the table. I think he's really intriguing in the run game, and I think he can play on the outside and in the slot, which makes him really interesting. There are some good day 2 guys here, including Dwayne Carter out of Ohio State. His size and length has propelled him from being a projected 4th or 5th round pick when we last talked about him into the 2nd round. Now, he was a little bit disappointing at the Combine. Before that, there was a shot he was going in the 1st round. Now, probably not. He's not an elite athlete, but he is a pretty solid cover player. Xavier Proctor out of Florida is somebody who has really high upside. When we did the first prospect profile, I highlighted this play in specifically where he literally runs the route for this wide receiver, that receiver being Arturo Modelo, who, as we know, is a pretty good route runner. So Proctor has shown the ability against great receivers to be a really solid cover corner, and his size at 6'4", 207 makes him very fascinating. He just needs to be more consistent. If he does, I think he could be the best corner in the draft. When I said that Colorado's Deshaun Faith had the best ball skills of any corner in the draft, I lied. Darius El Hadid out of Memphis blows him out of the water in that aspect. He picked off 10 passes this year. He knows how to bait quarterbacks into throwing the ball his way, and he knows how to get to the football like he's a wide receiver. He can be a little inconsistent in coverage, but overall very solid, especially in zone. The one issue with him is that he's 24 years old. But other than that, I think he's got a very high floor at corner, and he's going to be a great player in this league. Some other intriguing defensive back prospects include J.J. Thompson out of Washington State, Damian Henderson out of A&M, Kavonte McBride out of Alabama, and even late down the board, a lot of guys I like, including Connor Miller Sr. out of Wisconsin. Let's move over to safety. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a loaded safety class. There's a reason why we didn't feel pressured to go out and get a big safety in free agency. That's because there's about 10 guys here who I think could make an impact for us right away. There's no safety in this class who's a more intriguing prospect, though, than Pip Smalling out of Oklahoma State, who I think is one of the 3 or 4 best football players in the entire draft. I would love to get our hands on him. I don't think it's going to happen. He's going to go in the top 10. He is an elite cover safety. He brings a lot to the table as a run defender as well. And oh yeah, he's a freak athlete. He tested in first amongst all safeties in most of the combine drills. The production he brings to the table, along with his athleticism, makes him an awesome prospect. One of the most talented safeties to enter the NFL in the last 5 to 10 years. And I think he's got a shot to be an all-pro as a rookie. That's how good he is. So assuming we don't get Smalling, there are some good options for us in the first round if we do address safety early, such as Roman Foster out of Tennessee. 20 years old. He's super young. And I think he is sort of a moldable piece of clay because you can really turn him into any type of safety. 6'3", 200 pounds. He's played a lot of free safety, a lot of strong safety. Good cover player, but he is a great run stopper. That's the calling card of his game right now. I think if he improves in coverage, which he's got a lot of time, he's 20 years old, then I think he could be one of the best safeties in the NFL as well. Here at strong safety, there's some more guys who have a real shot to go in the first round. We'll start with Ukemi Watkins out of Oregon, one of those fun defensive players in college football this past season. Watkins reminds me a lot of Isaiah Simmons because he's a bigger safety, 6'3", 215 pounds. He's a really impressive athlete, 4.38 40-yard dash. He tested very well in the agility drills, very well in the jumping drills, very well in the bench press. And I think his versatility is what teams are really going to love about him. You can put him at either safety spot. You can put him at outside corner, inside corner, linebacker. He can do just about everything for you on the defense. He's a versatile chess piece who you can put anywhere on the defense, and he'll find a way to make plays. I think he's going to be a better player than Isaiah Simmons because I think he's a little bit more polished, especially in the run game, but also in coverage as well. And I think he'll absolutely be worth a first-round selection. Luchez Delete out of Boise State is another super versatile player who also can be used in a ton of different ways. He's not quite the athlete that Ukemi Watkins is. He's also not as big, so I don't know if you're going to get as many snaps at him as a linebacker per se, but he's also a really good run stopper, very solid in coverage as well. I think he's sort of the poor man's version of Ukemi Watkins, if you will. Cole Palmer out of Rutgers, I think, also has a shot to go in the first round. I think he's a little bit more polished than both of these top 2 guys. He's a better cover player. He's got better ball skills, arguably a better run stopper as well. He just doesn't necessarily bring the versatility and upside that they do. But I think of these top strong safeties, he's going to be the best one on day 1. And then there's Tyrell Legend out of North Carolina, who I really like as well, and I think should go in the first round. Only 20 years old. At 6'1", 220 pounds, I think Legend can play both free and strong safety. Another guy who is very versatile, very solid run defender, and I think he's a good athlete as well. Let's go back to free safety, look at some possible gems down the board. Hezekiah Harbor out of Florida State's pretty talented, so is Jaden Nelson out of Kentucky. But I think the name to really watch out for on day 2 is going to be Temple safety Alex Weldy Jr. Now, he's very undersized, 5'10", generous 5'10", by the way, and he weighs in at around 175 pounds. So already the size appears to be an issue, but he's a really good cover player. I think he might be best at slot corner. He's a really good man cover player, but I think he's also pretty good in zone, and he's a really good athlete as well, very instinctive. Not a great run defender, though, which is my one issue with having him at slot corner. Maybe he'd be better as a center field free safety, so whoever drafts him is going to have to figure it out, but I think he's a talented player. I like the depth down the board at free safety, and then strong safety as well. A few guys who I really like, especially some of these day 2 players, and that starts with UCLA's Jalen Bourgeois. I think he's a really intriguing player because of his versatility. Jack of all trades, master of none. There's not like one particular thing that he's really good at, but he checks off all the boxes. Solid run defender, solid cover player. He tested very well at the combine, which I think could lead to a team maybe at the back end of the first round taking a shot on him. Unlikely, but I think it's possible. And then Nate Felder out of Auburn, a little bit undersized as well, 5'11", 207. He's a very solid tackler, very solid run defender. Not a particularly consistent cover guy, but I think he's got the athleticism to eventually show that he could be a really good cover player if he just improves his consistency, especially in zone. If he does, I think he could be really good. Devontae Bridges from Florida State, Jacoby McNeil from Syracuse, Jamal James out of USC, Jaquez Chaka Njoboku, all very talented players. It's a super good safety class at the top and down the board. If we don't get a safety early, I'm not worried, because in the second, third, even fourth round, there are other good players later who we can land. It's a really, really fun draft class. A lot of very intriguing skill sets. That's what I like the most about this group. A lot of very different type of players, which I think makes things fun and interesting. I think we could see a lot of these players go out of order because certain teams prefer different styles of players, and that's fine. That doesn't necessarily make them reaches. If the 4th projected corner is the second one off the board, it's fair because these guys all have very different skill sets. Let's take a look at the mock drafts now. We're going to take a look at 3. This first one was made at the end of the regular season, so naturally a lot of these guys' stocks have changed. The most interesting thing to me here is that there's no quarterback here in the entirety of the first round. They had the Dragons selecting tight end Keanu Hokulani. I think in terms of value, that's very fair. Hokulani's a really good player, but we just paid Isaiah Likely big money, and he's a very similar player to Isaiah Likely. The second mock draft has the big change of Stanley Cubbage Jr. going to the Green Bay Packers at 11. The Packers surprisingly let Jordan Love walk, and they have us going with Rudig Salamone, the guard out of Oklahoma. As for the third mock draft, top 4 exactly the same. Tuliesi, Markovich, Youngblood, and Julian, with Vernon Rudisale moving up to 5 to Detroit. They've got Stanley Cubbage Jr. again at 11. They had Caleb Mabin back in the top 10, and the previous mock draft did not have Mabin in the first round at all. Again, they have us going with Hokulani, which is weird because this is after we paid Isaiah Likely. Maybe they think we actually would look at another tight end. Maybe we become a team who runs a lot more 12 personnel and have 2 tight ends on the field. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't know if I want to use my first round pick and experiment with that, but could be something to think about. So that's going to wrap up the episode. Let me know what you guys think we should do down below in the comments for this upcoming draft. We've got a handful of selections and a real opportunity to boost this roster and hopefully continue to make ourselves a playoff contender as our championship window is now open. This team has shown the ability to make a playoff run. We have a legitimate franchise quarterback on a rookie contract. Now is the time for this team to really make a run at the Super Bowl. I hope everybody enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.